While the city's murder rate seems to get a lot of attention, armed robberies are on the rise.
In some neighborhoods, there are more than others, but across the entire city, you may be surprised by how many have happened this year alone. In this special crime tracker report, Natasha Robin has Mean Streets.
I know what happens when people get shot. And that's what's going to happen to me. This is how it's going to end, you know.
Victims of armed robbery say they felt terrified and violated. This victim says it changed her life.
As I was going to get out of my car, so I unplugged my phone, was going to turn the keys of the ignition and open the door handle, and I looked up and there was a gun at the window pointed at me.
The victim, who Fox 8 will not identify, works as a paramedic for New Orleans EMS. Guns pointed in her face, they cursed and yelled at her to get out of the car. She knew exactly what could happen.
When I saw the barrel of a gun, my first thought was I'm going to die. With my occupation, knowing what happens when you get shot, my coworkers are going to be picking me up. I'm going to wind up a room 4 activation at University Hospital, you know, all of that.
In near shock, she got out of the car, handed over her cell phone, and slowly backed away from the gunman.
I said, the keys are in the car. Car's running, it's yours, take everything, take whatever you want. And I just turned and ran because I figured that was the best chance that I had to get away. And if he was gonna shoot me, he was gonna have to hit a moving target, and he was gonna shoot me in the back. I wasn't gonna let somebody shoot me point blank, standing right there, not doing anything.
The victim stopped running, hid behind some bushes, and watched as the gunman tried to steal her sports car.
Apparently, the manual transmission kind of confused them.
It seemed they couldn't figure out how to operate a stick shift. After 2 unsuccessful attempts, both men jumped into a getaway van and took off with the victim's EMS bag, cell phone, and keys to her home and car.
They got things that made my life inconvenient that I have to change, you know, or whatever, but they took away my sense of safety, and that's what I'm mad about. That's what, you know, that's what upsets me, because I'm like, this is my home, you know, I'm very happy here. I don't want to like put a for sale sign up and be like, I'm done. I don't want to do that, but at the same time, I'm like, when am I going to feel like, okay, I can breathe?
She isn't alone. In fact, across New Orleans, hundreds of people have become armed robbery victims this year alone. In this crime tracker investigation, Fox 8 obtained the incident report numbers, locations, and time of day for every armed robbery since January 1st until October 1st of this year. On this map, red dots show the sheer number of incidents. Across the entire city, the NOPD has investigated 658 armed robberies in that time period.
Armed robberies is actually the measure by which we gauge violence in society.
The NOPD admits armed robberies are up this year compared to last. And when you take a closer look at where they're happening, it becomes even more telling. In some areas, the victims of armed robbery are business owners. For example, right here at Franklin Avenue in St. Claude, you have the Whitney Bank, the Shell station, and then the McDonald's. All victims of armed robbery this year alone. Of all the districts in the city, the 7th district, made up of New Orleans East, ranks first for having the most incidents, 110 armed robberies this year. Compare that to the 4th district, Algiers, with 41 armed robberies.
3 customers that came in without knowing at 3 a.m. in the morning or after 3 a.m. and they robbed the store.
The owner of Eastside Cash and Carry caught the action on his store surveillance cameras.
They know what they're doing. They came in, even though they went inside my office. They broke my door inside my office.
The suspects, guns drawn, ordered 3 employees to the floor. They rummaged through the place, stealing cash, cigarettes, and the owner's guns from his office. He says his workers were traumatized and he's fed up.
Honestly, it's been happening the past year. It's been happening more than one. I mean, a lot of stores. Some stores they've been robbed more than 3 times this year. Even most likely gas station, and my store is one of them.
His store is located on Chef Mentor Highway, the scene of 23 armed robberies in 2014. More than any other street in New Orleans.
7th District is very unique. It's easy to have 110 when you see an area that's 110 square miles, you know, with 70,000 residents. So it is somewhat of a challenge.
NOPD's Deputy Chief Bob Barty says that challenge is solving some of the crimes. He says besides the armed robberies involving businesses, several of them are connected to prostitution and the drug trade.
It's really hard to get the witnesses to come back or even participate in a follow-up investigation or make an identification.
That challenge is also a problem in other parts of town, like the Marigny and French Quarter, where the most concentrated number of armed robberies are happening.
The French Quarter is probably the hardest place to solve a crime in the city of New Orleans.
It's also the place where thousands of tourists visit every day.
If you become a victim of an armed robbery and they snatch your iPhone and you're going back to Boston, are you coming back to prosecute? And they're quite aware of that, so it's really hard.
The most popular street in the French Quarter is no doubt Bourbon Street, but it's also the place where several people have become victims of armed robbery since January 1st. In an 8-block stretch of Bourbon Street, along with Dauphine, which is the next street over, there have been 14 armed robberies.
And for people parking on St. Philip Street near Armstrong Park to visit the French Quarter, take note. There's been an armed robbery on every corner, from North Villeray to North Rampart this year. It seems you're most likely to become a victim in the late evening around 9 p.m. through about 1 a.m. 67% of the time, the robber is armed with a gun. Other times, they'll use a knife or some other weapon. Fox 8 has reported armed robberies that involved baseball bats and even a machete.
The thing that shocks me, I think, the most is just the total disregard that people have or are able to have for life. Just, you know, I mean, they're so brazen and they don't, you know, these criminals don't care. They don't think that this is someone's sister, mother, father, child, you know, brother, sister.
Behind every armed robbery stat, there's a victim who will tell you the experience has altered their life in a negative way. For the New Orleans paramedic, she never imagined she'd be one of them.
We think we're invincible, you know, and I did have that thought a little bit before. Like, I'm the one that helps victims, I'm not going to be a victim, you know, so I kind of, was there a little arrogance in that sometimes? Yes, because I felt safe, you know, I felt safe in my home, I felt safe, you know, in my neighborhood, I felt safe in my city because I didn't think it was going to be me. Nobody thinks it's going to be them, you know, and if I can tell people anything at all, it could be you.
Natasha Robin, Fox 8 News.
The NOPD says despite some challenges, the department's solve rate is above the national average in some districts. The national average is 26%. The NOPD has a near 40% solve rate in the 2nd and 6th districts. You can find an interactive map locating each armed robbery incident in Natasha's report on our website. Just log on to fox8live.com and you'll be able to click on each mark to find the incident number, location, and description of every armed robbery. That means you can see exactly what is happening in your neighborhood.
Hundreds more people have become victims of armed robbery this year compared to last.
There's been a 38% increase in the crime, and that's affecting every district and nearly every neighborhood in New Orleans. Natasha Robin has this crime tracker follow-up investigation.
I finished with the customer, and the last customer left. After a couple of minutes, he showed up with a weapon in his hand.
This employee of Metro PCS, who Fox 8 will not identify, became one of the city's most recent victims of armed robbery. Tuesday night, just before closing, surveillance video shows a man walking in with a large gun and pointing it at the employee.
He was screaming, like, put your hands up and give me all the cash. And I'm like, all right, chill out. just chill out, man. He told me, like, give me all the cash in the register.
The employee reached behind the counter and began to remove the cash.
He told me, like, hold on, what you doing, man? What you doing? Why you're so late? Just give me the money, man, hurry up.
After taking the money, he grabbed the victim's cell phone on the counter and took off. Armed robberies just like this one are happening at an alarming rate in the city of New Orleans. According to the NOPD, from January 1st to October 1st, there were 729 armed robberies, compared to 528 in the same time period last year. That's a 38% increase.
These numbers maybe seem high, and they are quite alarming, and certainly one armed robbery is way too many. But what you do see is these are coming off of dramatic decreases, especially uptown, 40% reduction in armed robberies in both the 2nd and the 6th, with an unbelievably high solve rate.
In a recent crime tracker investigation, Fox 8 obtained the incident report numbers, locations, and time of day for 658 cases that were initially reported as an armed robbery.
Armed robberies is actually the measure by which we gauge violence in society.
Red dots on this map show where they're happening. Of all the districts in the city, the 7th district, made up of New Orleans East, ranks first for having the most incidents. 110 armed robberies this year.
They know what they're doing. They came in, even though they went inside my office. They broke my door inside my office.
Surveillance cameras at the East Side Cash and Carry on Chef Mentor Highway captured this brazen armed robbery. The store's owner says his employees were terrified to come back to work. The most concentrated number of armed robberies seem to be happening in the Marigny and French Quarter, especially on Bourbon Street and Dauphine. In an 8-block stretch, 14 armed robberies happened since January 1st. NOPD's Deputy Chief Bob Barty says every incident is taken seriously as investigators work to solve them.
If a crime happens, there's a good chance that in 10 minutes we're going to be discussing that crime. And if it spreads over to another district, we're going to have a conference call with all those districts. You know, you'd see a nexus reaching out to each and every district coming right now. So I think there's a lot of good things going on.
Still, they say preventing armed robberies from happening in the first place is key. There's hope. With more than a dozen new recruits hitting the streets soon, increased visibility will make a difference. Natasha Robin, Fox 8 News.
You can find an interactive map locating each armed robbery incident in Natasha's report on our website. Just log on to fox8live.com and you'll be able to click on each mark to find the incident number, location, and description of every armed robbery. That means you can see exactly what is happening in your neighborhood.